Hi guys, I'm joining y'all today from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Welcome to part 3 of my 3-part series about why my channel is named Basque-Icelandic Pidgin. In the last 2 videos, we talked about the very interesting languages that are Basque and Icelandic. In this video, we're going to answer the question, what is a pidgin? Or I should say, what is a pidgin? Well, a pidgin is a combination of 2 languages to allow communication between groups of people that don't have a language in common. They often arise when 2 groups of people want to trade with each other, but don't know each other's language. Pidgins don't have any native speakers, and they tend to be a lot simpler than their parent languages. The goal here is to be able to understand each other, or mutual intelligibility, and not a complex grammar, so stuff like grammatical gender gets thrown by the wayside. In time, even just 1 generation, a pidgin can become a creole, where a group of native speakers speak the creole as their first language. A good example of a creole is Haitian Creole, the most widely spoken Creole language in the world. Its vocabulary is mostly French, but its grammar is much more like Fongbe and Igbo. It started out as a pidgin language between French settlers and enslaved Africans, but today is a native language of millions of people and is one of the national languages of Haiti. There are actually quite a few English-based creoles and pidgins out there. For example, Tok-Pisin, a national language of Papua New Guinea, is an English-based creole. In fact, the name Tok-Pisin just comes from the English talk and pigeon. The word pigeon itself is falsely believed by some to come from the bird pigeon, since pigeons were used to carry messages. However, this is incorrect. It actually comes from the pronunciation of business in Chinese Pidgin English. Me personally, I don't really see how they got from business to pidgin, but that's okay. Sadly, people really like hating on pidgins. They are seen as a patois, or languages that are considered unsophisticated and non-standard. As usual, the culprit is, alas, racism. What about Basque and Icelandic? Well, it turns out there actually was a pidgin language that was a combination of these already really weird languages. That's right, Basque-Icelandic Pidgin was a real language, and my channel's name is just a pun on the name of that language. But how did Basques get all the way up north to Iceland? Whaling. The Basques loved whaling. Just take a look at some of their town emblems. Some of them ended up sailing up north to Iceland to go whaling in the West Fjords, and they used Basque-Icelandic Pidgin to communicate with locals. But are Basque and Icelandic really that compatible for pidgining? Let's compare them the only way I know how, through Scrabble. First, I will show you all the distribution of tiles in English. We can pretty clearly see the inverse relationship, where the more points a tile is worth, the less there are in the bag, which is generally the case in Icelandic and Basque as well. Now let's look at Icelandic and Basque. Icelandic is missing C, Q, W, and Z, but it does have thorn, ev, and ash. It even has the vowels with accents, proving that they are in fact their own letters. As for Basque, while C, Q, V, W, and Y are all technically part of the Basque alphabet, they're only used in loanwords, so they're not included. The Inye as well is very much a part of the Basque language, but it's also excluded since it is used in very few words. I find it very interesting that the digraphs RR, TS, TX, and TZ aren't generally considered their own letters in Basque, and yet they do get their own tiles. It's also very interesting to see that the K is worth only 2 points in both Basque and Icelandic, versus the 5 in English. I guess by not having a C or a Q, they're left with only one option if they want to make the K sound. Take the Basque for thank you, eskerikasko. If you wanted to play that in English Scrabble, you'd have to use the lone K as well as both blanks. Of course, your opponent would then promptly challenge it off the board since it's Basque, not English, and it's 2 words. What about the number of words? Basque is roughly within the ballpark of English. Icelandic, on the other hand, has over 2 million words. In fact, After Nigel Richards won the French Scrabble Championship, without knowing any French, mind you, the Icelandic Scrabble Club told him, "The French lexicon is easy compared with Icelandic's 2.3 million words. Claim the Icelandic crown and prove to the world that you're indisputably the greatest player of all time." But how in the world does Icelandic have so many words? Inflections. Like in Old Norse, every base word has many different words that you can make with it just by changing a few letters. And that's without even mentioning all the compound words. Languages like Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish have all been greatly influenced by their neighbors, including each other. Iceland, on the other hand, is isolated off in this little island in the North Atlantic. Combine this with Icelandic's concept of linguistic purism that leads to them not taking any loan words from other languages, and you'll see why Icelandic has changed a lot less from the Viking days than its relatives. Icelandic still greatly resembles Old Norse, and Icelanders can still mostly read the Icelandic sagas written by settlers 800 years ago. One could not say the same for English. Basque is also kind of isolated by mountains, which are speculated to be a part of the reason it still exists, while the rest of the Paleo-European languages died off. Alright, now let's talk about Basque-Icelandic Pidgin. What would a language made of a mix between the weird Basque and Icelandic languages look like? I don't know, because I lied to you earlier. Basque-Icelandic Pidgin is not a mix of Basque and Icelandic. In fact, Basque-Icelandic Pidgin doesn't contain any Icelandic whatsoever. That's right, Basque-Icelandic Pidgin is mostly just Basque, but with some Dutch, English, French, German, and Spanish sprinkled in. But no Icelandic. But then, why is it called that? Because Iceland is where the only glossaries of it have been found, specifically the West Fjords I mentioned before. Sadly, it only consists of a few manuscripts, so we will never be able to fully understand Basque-Icelandic Pidgin, but they are very illuminating. Like most pidgins, Basque-Icelandic Pidgin existed for trade, so most of the vocabulary revolves around the exchanging of goods and services. For example, we've got "Presenta for mi berru usnia et bedia pura," which means, "Give me hot milk and new butter." "For mi presenta for you biscusa et sagarduna," or, "I will give you a biscuit and a sour drink." "Bocata for mi atora," or, "Wash a shirt for me." Let's analyze the most iconic phrase in these manuscripts. "Christ Maria presenta for mi valia, for mi presenta for you bustana." Or, "If Christ and Mary give me a whale, I will give you the tail." If we look at the Basque translation of this, "Christok et Maria palea amaten validate bustane e mango disut," and the Icelandic translation, "Hefi Christur or Maria mierkval skal je gefa hér sporðin," we'll see that the Basque Icelandic phrase greatly resembles its Basque counterpart, but doesn't resemble the Icelandic translation at all. There are also clearly some influences from Spanish and English with "presenta," "for me," and "for you." My personal favorite is "for you mala gisuna," or "you are an evil man." Was this really something they found themselves needing to use often? Well, relations between Basque whalers and Icelanders weren't all sunshine and whale tales. In fact, in 1615, there occurred an event called Uskal Balesalien Triskansa in Basque, Spanverjaviging in Icelandic, and in English, the slaying of the Spaniards. This event was a massacre of Basque whalers that took place in, you guessed it, the West Fjords. 32 Basques were murdered and mutilated, and the sheriff of the West Fjords, Are Magnusson, drew up a decree declaring that Basque people could be killed on sight. Why, you may ask? Because some of them stole some dried fish. Icelanders are very possessive of their dried fish, you know. 400 years later, Xavier Irujo, a descendant of one of the victims of the massacre, and Magnus Rafansson, a descendant of one of the perpetrators, set up a stele in Holmavik in memory of the event. At the opening ceremony, Jonas Guðmundsson, the Westfjords district commissioner, repealed Ari Magnusson's decree. So for all of my Basque viewers out there, you can now go visit the beautiful Westfjords without having to fear getting murdered. Well, I guess you could still get murdered, but now you can rest assured knowing that your murderer would get a slap on the wrist. Of course, the repealing of the decree was mostly just symbolic. Jonas Guðmundsson himself said, "We have laws, of course, and killing anyone, including Basques, is forbidden these days." Anyways, Basque-Icelandic Pidgin is actually not the only pidgin language featuring Basque. There was also Algonquin Basque Pidgin, also known by its even cooler name, Sorokoi, which was created for trade between Algonquin peoples around the Gulf of St. Lawrence and, you guessed it, Basque whalers. The Basques were quite influential in the region. In fact, the Mi'kmaq language still has words borrowed from Basque. Some people like to say that English itself is a pidgin, or a creole, or three languages in a trench coat, because of its Germanic and Romance influences. Plus, English simplified a lot after all the Viking invasions and the Norman conquest, making Middle English lack a lot of the grammatical structures that Old English had, like grammatical gender. But most linguists agree, English is not a pidgin. It is firmly a Germanic language with influences from languages like French, Latin, Greek, and others. But I personally agree with linguist John McWhorter that English is a semi-Creole, where it's kind of a Creole and kind of not. Of course, take my opinion with a grain of salt. I'm not a real linguist. Heck, I'm not even a real YouTuber. Still, it can be interesting to think about all the different influences on English, like how our grammar is mostly Germanic, but a lot of our vocabulary is Romance, but then the words that we use most often are Germanic. Plus, it can be interesting to think about the words that come from languages other than just French, Latin, and Greek, like the Arabic algorithm, algebra, alcohol, and the Icelandic saga, geyser, and skier. For those of you wondering what skier is, I actually managed to get some. This Icelandic yogurt is made with very specific bacterial cultures that give it a taste that's ever so slightly different and ever so slightly better than your typical Greek yogurt. Only a few companies actually sell it in the US, Icelandic Provisions and Sigis, though in Iceland you can find it basically anywhere. Still though, in the States, most major grocery stores actually do carry it. So you can manage to get you some too. It's very rich and creamy. I love it. This and some kleinur, gas. So go check it out if you want, and if you're Icelandic Provisions or Sigis, please sponsor me. But that about does it for the video, guys. So have a nice day. You know, as I was scrolling through the Wikipedia page for Scrabble letter distributions, I discovered that Basque and Icelandic aren't even the weirdest languages to get Scrabble editions. I think next week I'm going to tell you guys about some of them. So if you want to find out about Scrabble in Leetspeak, Na'vi, and even Welsh, stick around. Have a nice day. Really? Welsh? That's too far, man.